What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another SK Wealth Academy podcast interlude B. Why accountability is the key to ending police brutality. Now, before I get started, please hit the subscribe button if you have not yet done so right below, and hit the notification bell as well to be informed of any new fresh content that I upload. If you're listening to my podcast on Podbean, Spotify, or Apple iTunes, I'll put the links below if you want to know how to download MP3 files of my podcast online. Please subscribe to my RSS feeds to be notified of new podcast uploads. So let's get started. Now, I said in my last podcast I was going to speak a little bit about why I feel like institutionalized brutality of law enforcement in the U.S. has actually not stayed the same over the last couple decades, but actually has gotten worse. Because in the last video, remember I relayed a story in which a cop stopped me and illegally searched me and was putting his hands in my pockets, and I feared that he was going to cup and hide a little bag of drugs and then put it in my pocket and then pull it out and then arrest me. So I started turning my pockets inside out, and my arms actually clashed with his as he was reaching in my pockets, and I was frantically trying to turn my pockets inside out. And today, I think that if you did that, first of all, the police probably would have tried to punch me in the face because he would have said I was assaulting him just because my arms rubbed against his. And then if you reach in your pocket today, that is justification for a cop to murder you. Because cops have always said in court, of course they're standing before corrupt judges that are part of the parasitic system too, and that's why they're acquitted. All they have to state is, I thought he was reaching for a weapon, that's why I shot and killed him, and then the judge will acquit that dirty cop. So today I would never do that, and that is proof that the brutality of the law enforcement system is even worse today than it was when I still lived in the United States. And furthermore, because the cops became very militarized under Barack Obama, because I can't remember the name of the law, but Barack Obama basically passed a law that allowed police departments all over America to request military grade equipment, along with even military armored vehicles. And yes, it was Barack Obama, for those people out there that love Barack Obama, that made the police brutality situation worse. And so again, although some people will say, to be fair to him, he did dial it back a little bit. I mean, he didn't get rid of that law, he dialed it back. But then when Trump came in, Trump just dialed it back up. So for those of you that lived in LA, you may remember that North Hollywood assault on Bank of America, in which that news story went viral in America because people were like, oh, this is insane. This is just like the bank robbery from that movie Heat with Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, because these bank robbers have full body armor, they have automatic assault weapons, they're more equipped than the cops were, because the cops were trying to stop them just with handguns. But today we see that's not the situation. So it's easier for cops to be more brutal today, thanks to Barack Obama and thanks to Donald Trump. But and then when we see entertainers, one of the reasons I made my last video is we still see that a lot of understanding is not there. Like Drew Brees, for example, if you're a sports fan, totally has no understanding of his position in society, what he does not see as a part of the dominant culture in America. And there are plenty of people that are part of the dominant culture that didn't understand Childish Gambino's "This Is America" video when he posted it too, because he was trying to say that there is still a lot of racism in America, it just has gone underground. But a lot of people reacted to that who are part of the dominant culture, was like, who is this Childish Gambino guy? Does he think we're still living in the 1960s? And as I just argued, I think it's even worse than the 1960s, because although the police brutality is not as overt as it was in the 1960s, I think it's more violent than it was in the 1960s, because I think a lot more people are dying today. I haven't looked at the statistics, but I think the statistics would actually prove prove my point there. And again, part of the reason that there's so much division in America is thanks to mass media. Thank you, MSNBC. Thank you, CNN. Thank you, Fox News. Thank you, ABC. Thank you, CBS. Thank you, NBC, because they jump all over hate. They love spreading hate on their news. And it's funny because Fox even has a tagline, is fair and balanced reporting, when much of the reporting is unfair, unbalanced, and very, very biased. So, of course, they promote hate because hate sells. So it's to feed their bottom line of profits. But I don't believe it's all about profits, because I've heard a lot of people say, oh, look at these parasitic news organizations, all they care about is money. Now, while that may be part of the reason why they promote so much hate instead of solutions, also it's because they are owned by the parasitic class. They're owned by the richest people in America. So they, of course, they support the parasitic class because they know who pays pays for their mortgage. They know who pays for their lease, for their 7 Series BMW. They know and they understand that. So they're, as part of the parasitic class, they will promote their agenda of spreading hate to divide and conquer. Now, if you're looking for real journalism, I recommend that you follow someone named Chris Hedges, because he's probably one of the few American journalists I respect, and because he makes a lot of sense when he speaks about issues of politics, war, and race. And he used to work for mass media, but when he spoke truth to power, of course, they fired him. And he used to be a war correspondent, so he has a lot of understanding of issues of brutality, and he is actually a former Pulitzer Prize winner when the Pulitzer Prize meant a lot more as well. So go follow Chris Hedges. Okay, so let's get started about solutions, because if we don't implement solutions, then what is this all for, right? What are all these protests for? What are the riots for? The last time massive riots happened in America was during the brutal beatdown of Rodney King in Los Angeles, but that was nearly 30 years ago. That was in 1991. So the bigger question we must ask is, why has nothing become better since then? Because we know what the solutions are. I'm sure there's nothing new that you are going to hear if you're a person of color, or even if you're a white person, if you're an activist. There's nothing I'm going to say that is going to be new to you and what I'm proposing in my solutions. And for those of you that haven't heard them because you only watch the mass media news, it's because the mass media news won't speak of solutions, because they concentrate on pouring more petrol on the fires and fanning the fires into bigger fires. Because again, they love promoting the divide and conquer agenda of hatred. But again, the whole key to everything, as is the title of this podcast, is accountability. Because every single person in that chain of accountability, the chain of command in law enforcement, must be held accountable. So that doesn't mean just the mayors of the cities. That doesn't just mean the police commissioners. The police chiefs have to be held accountable. The cops have to be held accountable. The prosecuting attorneys have to be held accountable. If they're the judges that acquit cops that commit brutal acts have to be held accountable. So how do we do this, right? The way we do this, and this is a solution not just for America, because I've seen videos go online in Australia of indigenous people complaining about police brutality and protesting police brutality in Australia. So these are solutions that can be implemented in Australia, in Canada, wherever. It doesn't, Brazil, it does not matter. It's all about the issue of accountability. There's no accountability for law enforcement in any nation. That's why police brutality continues. So we have to make every person in the chain of command accountable, and actually we have to punish them as well when they're not accountable. Because if you just hold them accountable and slap them on the hand, but don't give them any type of repercussions that they fear for committing crimes, then it's not going to work either. So again, I fully understand the anger, the frustration, the despair that's behind the rioting and looting, but rioting and looting hurts a lot of innocent people. because a lot of times they're targeting like Nike, Gucci, Prada, Nordstrom, Rolex. How these companies have nothing to do with police brutality. And even when the entity targeted is correct, like they targeted the police precinct in Minneapolis in which Derek Chauvin was part of, that still is not going to accomplish anything if we don't hold people accountable and we don't enforce and overhaul the entire system of accountability of law enforcement. That's what needs to be done. So how do we do this? Well, again, like I said, you have to hold every mayor in America accountable, and also the governors of all states. And in fact, I hold America's mayors and governors as partially responsible for the looting and the rioting, because, you know, their response to the virus pandemic was so spectacularly and unconstitutionally wrong, and they ruined millions of Americans' financial livelihoods unnecessarily, because there's plenty of evidence now, of course, that's not being reported by the mass media, that their blanket pandemic lockdown was based upon complete speculation and unknowns and not on factual knowns. So they turned up the anger to a simmering boil. It was already trying to like displace the lid of that pot it was boiling in. And then George Floyd's murder was just the match that lit that pot of anger on fire. So again, when we look at these mayors, they're not even accountable for ruining people's financial lives as part of their blanket pandemic lock. They should be held accountable. They should be fired. And thank God for Italians coming to their senses and now going out into the streets at thousands and not social distancing and protesting the blanket lockdowns there. And even though the Italian citizens are calling the virus a hoax, I don't think it's not a hoax. I mean, it's real, it exists, but it's only dangerous to a minute section of the population. So those are the people that should be quarantined. In the history of the world, no virus has quarantined, no viral pandemic has resulted in a quarantine of healthy people. That's not how you deal with a virus, with basically stopping the spread. You quarantine the people that are vulnerable. And why this was not done, like I said, there was something definitely more sinister behind it. And if you want to know the real reasons, I wrote an article on my new site, malamalama.com/WordPress. It was titled something like Connecting the Dots Behind the Global Pandemic Lockdown and Preserving the Wealth of the 1%. So just go look that up on my website and you'll find that article if you really want to know the real reasons behind the global pandemic lockdown. So again, the minute another innocent man, I don't care if that man is white, black, Asian, Latino, Cherokee, Sioux, member of any of the indigenous tribes of America, if they're murdered by a cop unjustly, the protest needs to be taken to the mayor's office and the mayor's home. Don't let the mayor sleep 24/7, every week of every month until that mayor resigns. And that's how you force change, because once mayors know they'll be held accountable for any police brutality that continues under her watch, they will make the changes to stop it, because the solutions, I'm sure, have been told to the mayors thousands of times. The mayors don't care and they just ignore it. Because I'm going to tell you what the solutions are. Even that Atlanta mayor that's coming out, I know you know what the solutions are. Why aren't you implementing them? Because every single person in the chain of command, like I said, from the mayor to the police commissioner, to the police chief, to the cops, to the lawyers, to the judges, we need to establish a nationwide database to achieve this. This is how you do it. Establish a nationwide database to achieve this, because cops right now can commit brutality and then they're fired and then they just move to another city and are hired, because there's no database to look them up and say, hey, this cop should not be a cop. And so this is how we hold them accountable. So they know they will lose their job and not be able to be just moved to another city and get hired in the same job and be the same a-hole they were, in the city in which they got fired. Because in banking, let me make this analogy, right? Because there's so much criminality still today, even after the 2008 global financial crisis. Criminality is systemic and rampant on Wall Street. It's criminality systemic and rampant in global financial firms, because there's zero accountability for their crimes. I can only think of two bankers for the thousands of bankers that commit crimes that went to jail. Bernie Madoff is one, and then the other one, I can't even remember his name. He worked for some U.S. firm and he went to jail. Some judge, some honest judge, actually sentenced his banker to jail for front running, which I explained to you in the last podcast is pure straight up theft. And so every single banker that commits front running should go to jail, but only one has. And again, so I can only think of 2 bankers that I've ever heard of out of thousands that commit crimes that go to jail. And before 2008, the bankers did not even have to admit guilt in court. And it's funny because when I worked for Smith Barney, which is the private wealth management division of Citigroup, Citigroup bankers were committing so many crimes, not only in the US, but in Europe, that the CEO would personally send us emails, because we were the highest profit margin division of Citigroup. And he would send us emails saying, this is how you handle client questions. If they say, we're going to leave because you're a criminal bank, no, you tell them this. And they would say, never admit guilt. Say we did not admit guilt to these acts, and that we just paid a fine, it's taken care of, we're not going to do it again in the future. So, the bankers were even allowed back then. The criminal justice system was so unjust that bankers were even allowed not to admit their guilt in court for committing the crime and just pay a fine, which of course would have zero disincentive for the banker to commit a crime in the future, because the fines weren't personally coming out of that banker's pocket. They're coming out of the corporate treasury of Citigroup. So there's no disincentive not to keep committing crimes, especially even when the fines were less than the profits made by Citigroup. So that's why we still have rampant criminality in global banking today. And that's why global bankers continue to launder drug money for the biggest, most violent Mexican drug cartels. That's why they continue to steal money through front running from clients. That's why they continue to steal by manipulating interest rates, by manipulating forex rates, by manipulating oil, gold, and silver prices, because they have impunity and they have zero fear of being sentenced to prison. So we have to have consequences, and we have to instill fear for criminality by having actual real consequences for committing crimes for any kind of reform to work. And as long as this is not implemented in the criminal justice system in America, you will continue to have police brutality 50 years from now. That is just as bad as what's going on today. So therefore, a national database has to be established. And every time a law enforcement agent is convicted of police brutality, everything about them has to go into the system. Their names, their social security numbers, and anytime they try to move and get a job in another city or metropolitan area, then simply they could be looked up. They could be seen as having conviction for police brutality. Sorry, you cannot be a cop. Same thing needs to happen. And again, the system of actually acquitting or convicting cops of police brutality charges has to be changed, because right now they're investigated internally by their internal affairs department, which has a near 100% acquittal rate. So when cops are brought up, the mayors have to change this. They have to say, we're going to appoint an independent arbitrator to look into this case, and you're going to get a fair trial of your peers in the community, not by other cops. The peers are going to decide whether that was police brutality or not, because we can't have this national database if internal affairs is determining if the cop committed brutality or not, because you're going to get nobody in that database. So if the mayor changes the platforms that are used to charge cops with brutality, then this will work. And then as well, because right now cops can just commit brutality, be fired, and move to another city and get another job, which is ridiculous. So if Canada immigration will prevent you from coming into their country with a DUI charge, then surely turning away a cop from being a cop in another city that has a police brutality record does not violate that cop's rights. And as I stated, again, this national law enforcement database needs to record corruption in the law enforcement chain of command along every single step of that command chain. And so if a police chief was fired for looking the other way and ignoring civilian complaints of police brutality, guess what? That police chief's details go into that national database, and he cannot get a job as a police chief in any other city. If a prosecuting DA gains acquittal for a cop that murders someone, and later that cop is murders someone else and is found guilty for murder, and then the circumstances of the previous case in which that prosecuting DA was able to get that cop released and acquitted, was found out that there was overwhelming evidence that that prosecuting attorney hid that would have basically gotten that cop convicted of murder, then that prosecuting attorney needs to be stripped of his right to practice as a lawyer, and his name needs to go into that national database so he can never become a lawyer in any other city or state. And then if a presiding judge acquits a cop that murdered an innocent civilian, and the same thing happens, that cop then murders someone else, and the cop is convicted of murder because he allowed a subsequent murder to happen that never should have happened. That judge needs to be fired. His or her name needs to be entered into the National Law Enforcement Database so they can never practice as a judge anywhere else. And trust me, if there are real repercussions, and not only that, then these national databases need to be shared with other nations. So then if a cop tries to move to Canada, the judge or lawyer, they can't practice there either because their name is in the database and will come up because they're not fit to practice as a cop, practice as a lawyer, practice as a judge. And if we have these real systems of accountability and repercussions, guess what? The problem of police brutality would get cleaned up real quickly. Might even get cleaned up in 1 month. And and for people that deserve to be in the national database that aren't, then use. Bill Gates has developed an invisible ink tattoo that he wants delivered with vaccines in the future that will mark that person as vaccinated. And the invisible ink tattoo can be read with an infrared smartphone app. So take that evil technology and use it for good. Tattoo all cops convicted of police brutality. So even if they're able to keep their names out of the national database, then you can just check with a smartphone. Oh, okay. You're one of these guys that committed repugnant police brutality in the past. They'll be forever inked and have a tattoo that will mark them as unfit to be a cop. So because there are so many racist cops, so that's only part one of the solution. Okay, part two is the whole platform in hiring and training cops needs to be completely blown up, overhauled, and rebuilt from scratch. And if that's not done, then again, all these protests will be completely meaningless. So the protests must end, and radical changes in accountability and punishment along every chain of command in the law enforcement process, and it must end in radical change in training for law enforcement. Because to say that things are not worse today, and it's only being documented at a higher rate just because everyone has a smartphone, I'm not so sure that is true. Because I actually think there could be more incidences of police brutality today than ever before. So, even though this was still happening under the Clinton and Obama administrations, it was just happening more out of our sight line, so we weren't aware of it. But to begin, let's just say screening practices in order to become a cop must change. So, there's a friend of mine that worked for Teach for America, known as TFA in New Orleans, and the TFA program frequently places teachers. It's a program where you go teach students in disenfranchised neighborhoods, and then you have your student loans are forgiven, and they're often placed in really highly blighted, high crime neighborhoods. So a friend of mine that worked for the TFA program in New Orleans said she witnessed cops sling drugs on the daily. So that's a problem. She knows about it, other cops know about it, and other cops are doing nothing about it. And so again, you can't say those cops that remain silent are bad cops. So you can't say that there's more good cops than bad cops, because every cop that remains silent about their fellow cops that are committing crimes are bad cops. And she told me a second story about another one of her friends putting in an application to become a member of the New Orleans PD. And when he applied to enter the police academy, they gave him some type of written exam, and he was told he was too smart to become a cop. He was actually told your score is too high, that you should go use your intelligence to do something more productive. So can you imagine? Now, I don't know if this is still going on today, that there's certain exams for the police academy, and if you score too high, they discourage you from. I'm sure he could have still became a cop if he wanted to, but they were discouraging him from becoming a cop. So can you imagine if like a hospital, the surgery department of a hospital rejected a surgeon that graduated at the top of his class in medical school because they're too smart? And they say, hey, you're going to save too many lives. We don't want you. Can you imagine if an engineering firm rejected engineering student that graduated at the top of his class because they said, you know what, your designs are going to be too sound, they're going to last too long, and they're going to prevent unsound design that might result in bridge and building collapses. So we don't want to hire you. Because in no other industry but law enforcement would such a practice exist. Because if any other industry, if that happened, if people felt nervous about interacting with the employees of that industry because they knew that people that were amongst the brightest and smartest were routinely turned away from that industry, that situation would never be tolerated. Every mayor would correct that. Every governor would correct that. Every state leader would immediately correct that. Only in law enforcement is that practice tolerated, if, like I said, that practice is still going on today. So again, we have to change the training practices. And also part of the training is live training, right? Because in New York during these protests, there was an instance where a cop shoved, someone a girl that could not, or a woman, I don't know her age. She looked actually to be more of a woman than a girl, but she was very slight frame. So I don't think she was more than like 45 kilograms. And the cop was probably at least 60-70% more than her weight, shoved her violently to the ground. She hit her head, and then she was concussed and had a seizure on the way. And guess what? His superior was right next to him and said nothing, did nothing. So again, superiors like this, when there's visual proof that they are silently endorsing brutality, they also need to go in that national database. They should be fired and never get hired as, some type of superior police officer with some superior rank in any other precinct or division in America. So again, training practices need to change, hiring practices need to change, accountability structures need to change. Right now there are literally, if we did this, there are thousands of cops that would lose their job because you can just go on YouTube and download all these videos. They should also, every single mayor should make a website for their city where police brutality, if it's filmed, could be anonymously reported. Even other police officers can anonymously report it, and then every single one of those instances needs to be investigated by an independent arbitrator. And if they are convicted of using excessive force, they should be fired. Their name goes into that national database. So again, because we have the means to document this now, because everyone has a smartphone, there should be municipal website in every single city where the people can upload instances of police brutality and hold them accountable. And these cops should know that they're going to be fired if an independent counsel, a jury reviews this and determines it to be unlawful excessive force. And so again, if this happened, guess what? George Floyd would never have been murdered. And so part of the screening process too that should be implemented is a psychological survey. Because when I went to work for Smith Barney in Beverly Hills, guess what? They gave me something like 100-question psychological assessment. They didn't call it a psychological assessment, but I could tell by the types of questions that were being asked, because it had nothing to do with finance or my knowledge of finance, that it had to do, they wanted some type of psychological assessment. Probably to determine if I was a sociopath, because if I was a sociopath, I'd probably be put on some kind of fast track to rise up in the system, because the greater the sociopath you are, the greater you could steal money from other clients and earn more profits for the bank. But in this instance, a psychological assessment tool, since they already exist, so one doesn't, don't need to reinvent the wheel for law enforcement. It could be implemented, because certainly the dumbest of the dumb, they aren't even dumb enough to hide their sociopathy. So they could at least route out the baddest of the bad seeds are, are going to show that they want to become a cop to just to bully other people, to brutalize other people, or even to steal, to commit all kinds of crimes under the cover of the badge, which happens, as well. Some cops become cops because then they can become a criminal. What better cover is there to commit crimes than to become a cop? So at the very minimum, you probably get rid of like 30-40% of the bad cops just from the psychological assessment tool. But then during every step of training, this type of assessment needs to happen as well. So it needs to be like a multi-level approach, because their bad tendencies should come out with proper training. The problem is there is not proper training that exists right now. So to begin, all cops should be required to pass a basic level of PT, physical training. That means running 5 miles under something like really easy, like 40 minutes, being able to complete like a certain number of dead hang pull-ups, is like 8 dead hang pull-ups, very easy again. Being able to complete a certain number of burpees per minute, certain number of push-ups per minute. Just make them complete like 35 push-ups like in a minute. Super simple, right? This is the basic minimum level of shape. Why should they not be required to be in shape? Because a lot of times police brutality happens because they're so out of shape. They feel they don't know how to properly handle themselves physically. So at any type, like a civilian may be on drugs or drunk, they don't deserve to be murdered just because of that, but they may be super aggressive. And in fact, because they're physically impaired because of certain drugs, they should be even easier to handle than someone that is not drunk. And especially if you're trained, then you should be able to handle them without even drawing your weapon, quite easily. So this is not a groundbreaking requirement to require cops to be physically in shape, because firemen are required. Because I participated in training with a fire department when I lived in Japan, and it's very physically demanding. If you can't pass, is that discrimination? You can't become a fireman, because when you go out to fight a fire, you're going to endanger your whole team if you can't pull your weight, because you're physically incapable of committing the activities or fulfilling the activities that a fireman needs to do. So why is that like anathema to requiring that for a cop? And all cops should receive a basic level of martial arts training in close quarters defense and hand-to-hand combat and jiu-jitsu, because I know that many people say, what, cops are already so dangerous, now you want to make them more lethal. But as long as they train under a true martial artist, they will actually become better people, because a true martial artist will make them better people. Trust me, they will break them down as far as their arrogance, and they will instill a warrior spirit, which is to inflict the least amount of damage to another human being to control the situation. So, and it will be beneficial to the cops because they will learn spacing too. They will learn because a lot of people don't understand spacing in confrontation, when they're safe, when they're not, when they're in danger. They don't understand that range of effectiveness for striking. So again, some of the best people I've met in the world have been people I've met through my training in martial arts. And if they're trained, of course, it's super important that law enforcement officers hire a competent instructor that believes in this martial arts philosophy. So they impart that martial arts philosophy to the people they train. And trust me, when you train people, you can get a sense of why they're training. You can get a sense if they're training for the right reasons, which is to become a better person, or they're training for the wrong reasons. Hey, I want to learn this so I can hurt other people. So the instructor should also be given authority to tell, say, a police chief, hey, this person should not become a cop. You should cut off this person's training right now, because I can't change this person's mentality, and I can see it. Because you can see that in martial arts class, like the people that were not there for the right reasons. And when they're not there and they start just like swinging wildly, throwing haymakers, trying to knock you out, like in class, like even though they're not skilled, right? Like in sparring sessions, I had those instances. So I just took someone to the ground and choked them out. And because their heart was so black, first of all, they understood nothing about martial arts. So they didn't even tap. They didn't even tap when they were starting to go unconscious. And when they started to go unconscious, even though my instructor, they came and tapped on my shoulder to, okay, let him go. I held that choke hold for just a second longer, because people that are bad people. So again, I would never do this to someone that listened to me, because I tried to tell that person, hey, stop trying to knock me out. Your skills are terrible. And if you just keep trying to hurt me, I'm going to shut you down. He didn't listen to me. That's the only reason I choked him out and then held my choke hold on him a little longer than necessary. And my instructor didn't even normally, if you do that to someone that is just, training and is a good martial artist, you will get highly, highly reprimanded and punished by your instructor. But my instructor didn't punish me because, for doing that, because he said he understood why I did that to this person. So again, police chiefs should listen to the martial arts instructor say this person's not fit to become a cop, then that person's journey to become a cop should be immediately ended right then and there. And then if the martial arts instructor says, hey, I'm kind of on the fence about this person, this person has some tendencies where they may inflict some brutality, but I don't want to stop their journey because they could change, then the cop should note that in this police officer's file, basically say that we need to keep an eye on this person. And then if they commit police brutality, then fire them, no questions asked. So the screening practice needs to be greatly enhanced as well. And, because I think there's a problem when my first martial arts instructor, who I trained for the longest time, because I was with him for 4 years, when he holds us as students more accountable than police chiefs hold their own police officers. Because he said he told us day one, if I find out that any of you take what I am teaching you to harm someone when you could have walked away, I don't even care if someone comes up to you and is aggressive. That's what he told us. It gets in your face, but he doesn't throw a punch and you knock him out. He said, you're out of my class, because you could have diffused that situation by walking away. He's like, only if you walk away and they follow you, okay, then you can engage them because you gave them a chance. Or you push them away and say, stop, and then they come at you hard, then you can engage them. But he said, if you engage them when it's unnecessary, you can walk away, then he's like, you're done. He's like, you won't be allowed to continue training with me because you're dangerous. You're going to hurt a lot of people with the skills I'm going to give you. And cops don't even tell that to other cops when they're being trained. So when my martial arts instructor holds us to a higher level than cops are, when cops are given a lot more power, they're given the power by giving a gun to end someone's life, there's a problem. So, and then even with the cops that people said, oh, look at these cops, that made me smile because these cops are kneeling with the protesters. I'm not buying that either. The training still needs to change because, okay, sure, some of those cops probably are really good cops, but I guarantee you 100% of them are not. And I guarantee you a lot of them are bad cops. And what I mean by that is that how many of those cops that kneel with protesters witnessed a fellow cop use excessive force or do something illegal but remain silent, like skimming money from a drug bust or something? I bet you that it is the majority, meaning well over 50% of them, have witnessed a fellow cop do something illegal or criminal and remain silent. So just because they're kneeling doesn't mean they're not part of the problem, because they're still part of the problem if they're silent. And that act of kneeling with protesters is a hollow act. And the one cop in my life I actually had a really good relationship with, he was not an active duty cop. It's because he was my Aikido instructor in San Francisco for the 1 year I lived there. And he and we had a strong enough relationship where I used to troll him all the time. So sometimes I come in with t-shirts that said, bad cop, no donut. One time I remember I attended an anti-police brutality rally in Oakland and I bought a t-shirt and it said, stop police brutality. And I came to class with it. And he said, oh, you want to punish everyone today, don't you? Because he's like, you want to have me punish you guys with a really hard class today, don't you? So we would joke around because he would laugh about it and stuff because he knew that I was just trolling him. But one time we sat down after class and he's telling me these stories about training in the police academy, and he said that they had to go through this video game called Shoot or Don't Shoot. And I said, okay, tell me about that game. So he said, well, obviously we just have this toy gun. There's a toy video gun, but we had just came upon a scene which someone came out that was armed. We saw him running out of a store after just committing an armed robbery, and then we'd have to chase him. And the video game is called Shoot or Don't Shoot because sometimes like other people would surprise us, pop out in the middle of nowhere. You can't just react and panic and shoot the person. Or sometimes the game would take the armed robber out of our visual line, so they disappear, and then somebody else could come back that was dressed almost exactly like them but wasn't the suspect, and then they may be approaching like an ice cream vendor, reaching in their pocket for their wallet. And so we have to learn, okay, you can't just make a snap judgment to shoot everyone. And so I said, okay, so how did you do? And he said, oh, I shot a lot of innocent people I shouldn't have shot. So I said, okay, how many times did you have to go through that training exercise before you didn't shoot anyone? He's like, oh, I always shot someone that shouldn't have been shot. So I said, like I said, how many times did you have to go through that exercise before you did shoot someone? He's like, oh, we never went to that point. Like, the cops always went and continued their training that has shot people in that exercise that shouldn't have been shot. And I said, what? Yeah, he said, they just said, don't do that in real life. So that's a problem with police training because they're enforcing that shooting someone is not a big deal. So obviously the whole training system needs to be completely overhauled and it needs to be corrected. So again, if a person in America hears, a person of color hears, well, cops just gonna cop. We all know what that means. And a lot of white people probably knows what that means as well. But, because to us, what that means is cop is going to commit injustice. So sooner or later, we're going to become a victim of injustice. And that's due to the hiring protocol and the training protocol being so poor that it weeds out nearly zero of the bad cops. So that needs to be changed. Because it's very similar to that Chris Rock, his famous comedic bit about Siegfried and Roy, who were this famous magician duo that had like the longest running show in Las Vegas for a while, and they would use a tiger in their act, and the tiger bit Roy and dragged Roy off the stage, and Roy almost died. So Chris Rock said, did that really surprise anyone? He said, it's in the tiger's nature to kill. So he said, the tiger just went tiger. So when we think of cops that commit acts of brutality as just going cop on U.S. citizens, there's something wrong with that. We need to change that perception. So in order to do that too, we also have to punish cops that do bad things, because, like I said, they don't get punished because even if the police precinct is fined, they're not paying fines out of their own pocket. So the way you punish cops, make it more personal to them. Like I said, if you have an independent review board, not affiliated with any police union, any police fraternal organization, they determine that a cop committed brutality, he's convicted, he goes to prison. The fines that are awarded, even for innocent cops, right? Innocent cops can get judgments because they were fired unjustly for reporting a criminal act. Every one of those fines, guess where it should come out of? It should come out of the pension plans of the cops. So it hurts every single cop, and therefore cops will be incented to police themselves, versus there's no incentive right now. In fact, there's not only no incentive to police themselves, there's an incentive to remain silent. So that's how you hit them where it hurts, in the wallet. And then, because that's how you would basically solve fraud in the banking system too. You can't convict these bankers of crimes and have their companies pay for it. You gotta hit them. You gotta say, okay, you know what? That $3 million fine, you gotta pay that. That's gotta come out of your own pocket. And then bankers would start committing crimes as well. So systemically across any industry, the way you stop this, that's why I say, I'm not saying anything new. The way you stop this is the same in any industry. And lastly, what I want to end this on is just by speaking about how differently the media has reported this situation. Because again, we've seen the anger of protesters and going to CNN headquarters in Atlanta and smashing the windows, and the CNN reporters being clueless, like, oh, we don't know, why are they here, why are they attacking us? It's because you're so biased in your reporting. That's why they're there. And again, there's an instance which I saw protesters surrounded Fox reporters and scared them half to death, but thank God they didn't lay hands on them. They only were yelling at them. And so nothing happened to this Fox reporters. But again, there's a reason of this, because people of color are sick and tired of this biased, unfair reporting about communities of color, even in these protests, right? How they are reporting them. Because everything, and again, the looting and rioting, that's wrong, right? But why do they report about like the same exact acts in Hong Kong as, oh, look how lovely this is. This is great. These people are fighting for freedom. When this Hong Kong protesters are doing the same thing, smashing windows, hurting businesses, shutting businesses down, causing damage to people that have nothing to do with the things they were fighting for as far as freedom from Chinese rule. They were setting public property on fire. In fact, the Hong Kong protesters even acted worse in some instances. They set people on fire. They murdered people that disagreed with them. And the American media, Fox News, CNN, oh, look at these lovely freedom fighters in America. It's so hypocritical. And then the same people that do the same things in America, look at these animals, look at these thugs. And in fact, there's proof, again, direct evidence that they're Western Asian provocateurs, smashing, causing peaceful protesters in Hong Kong, just like there are these examples of these white Asian provocateurs trying to incite the protesters to violence in America. And again, the mass media just ignores that. That's what infuriates people of color about the media. Because like in Hong Kong, there was graffiti sprayed, F the Popo. Everyone knows there's no local Hong Kong person ever going to call the police popo, because that was a term that originated out of Southern California bicycle cops that worked in pairs, that had PO for a police officer. When they stood next to each other, it said popo. That was a Western slang term for police. So the fact that this graffiti sprayed in Hong Kong, the Western Asian provocateurs working there. And again, when you have Joshua Wong, who was the leader of the HK protests, meeting with people of the National Endowment for Democracy, which the CIA has admitted. They admitted that was a front for the CIA. And then where do they report about this? And I'm not saying that, and then you see maybe like 60,000 people in a protest in Hong Kong. They're reporting 2 million people. And then there's other reports that, no, it wasn't 2 million. It was 250,000. Now, 250,000 is still massive, but it's not 2 million. And then you see, because think about 2 million, if you ever been to a sporting event, 60,000 people is a massive amount of people in a football stadium. 60 million people is 33 football stadiums. I highly doubt those figures were accurate. But they, because they're framed as freedom fighters, we're going to just lie and say 2 million people were there when there's no evidence. And if there were, they would have shown you the aerial views that showed 2 million protesters that were out. So granted, 250,000 people is still a lot, but how do they report that in America? They do the exact opposite. When you see literally tens of thousands of people in protests in San Antonio and LA, I've been listening to report, look at the hundreds of protesters, So that's why people are so fed up with how the media reports us. And then they report them as looting. Yeah, they are looting. They're looting millions of merch from all these stores, but then they look the other way when the upper class, the wealthy class, the parasitic class that they support loot trillions. You know how much the U.S. Central Bank gave $29 trillion to bankers? So the banks wouldn't collapse in the 2008 financial crisis. And they actually probably gave a lot more, because that 29 trillion figure is a figure from the General Accounting Office. That figure came from an official government department, 29 trillion. Now, have you ever watched a bank heist movie in which they fill up like a duffel bag full of $100 notes, and that's $1 million? Think about it. $1 trillion is 1 million of those duffel bags. 29 trillion is 29 million of those duffel bags. They walk away with 29 million of those duffel bags. We're talking collectively in America, these looters were stealing only millions of merch. When we're talking like Give them 29 million more of those duffel bags before you start calling those looters looters, if you're not going to call the Wall Street looters looters, because they're looting. But you don't do that. That's why people are so frustrated with mass media. And that's why when we look at the parasites on mass media, like the Anderson Coopers, the Rachel Maddows, the Mika Brzezinskis, the Bill Maher's, that are buddy-buddy with the parasitic class, criticize the looters, but they never criticize the wealthy for looting us blind. And not only, not even, you don't even have to go back to 2008, just go back to 2020, the beginning of this year. The central bankers are giving the bankers trillions of dollars, hundreds of billions every day through overnight repo purchases. They're looting us, and they speak nothing of this. They don't say, oh, look at that thuggish act. Those bankers are animals. They should all be in jail. No, instead you get our president saying, you loot, we shoot. And just to end this, I'm going to leave you with a brilliant speech by Bobby Kennedy after Martin Luther King was murdered. And again, because his speech was designed to de-escalate the anger. It wasn't you loot, we shoot. That's why there weren't any riots in Atlanta after MLK was murdered, because we had leaders that were not part of the parasitic class back then, that actually would tell speeches, not adding more petrol to the fire, but that would de-escalate the situation. So thank God for independent media, because the mass media has been completely silent when it comes to these matters. So I think that just about wraps it up, what I wanted to say for this video. So let me know what you think, because a lot of times we have to make these videos. The reason is because there's so many people that still have zero understanding of what's really going on. You look at what Drew Brees said. Drew Brees says, if you disrespect the flag by kneeling, which Colin Kaepernick was not doing. He never said, I'm protesting flag. He said, I'm protesting police brutality. And even if you disrespect the flag does not mean justice for everyone. Obviously, everyone does not receive justice in America. The dominant class would see that as a symbol of freedom because they receive justice. But think about how ignorant Drew Brees' statement is, because what was the situation in America before the American Revolution, before that war? What was flying in all the colonies? The British flag, right? So in order to have the American flag now flying, what was the symbol of oppression? The British flag. And guess what happened if you burned that flag? What would happen if you wanted your freedom? Because you weren't part of the dominant class. The very people that now populate America were not part of the dominant class. If they burned that British flag, which is a symbol of oppression, then they were seen as, being the instigators, being the troublemakers, being not being unpatriotic. So can you see how history, through time, those people that were terrorists now become the patriots? So you have to understand history in order to make statements that have a historical context. That's what you have to understand. That's why I'm making, because again, like I heard statements, people say, oh, no Americans really knew what terrorism was, until 9/11. That's not true either. Because if that was not true, then my heart would not have beat fast every time a cop pulled up next to me when I was living in America. There's plenty of people that were not part of the dominant class that faced terrorist acts all the time. So again, I hope that this message really resonated with some of you. For some of you that may not have understood, the reason I'm making these is to help everyone understand. So I even hope that I was able to maybe change some minds of people that disagreed with me if you agreed with things I said in this video. So thanks so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, especially if you stay to the end. And as always, remain intensely curious. So long.
Sad news for all of you, and I think sad news for all of our fellow citizens and people who love peace all over the world. And that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis. Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love, and do justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. For those of you who are black, considering the evidence evidently is that there were white people who were responsible, you can be filled with bitterness and with hatred and a desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country, in greater polarization, black people amongst blacks and white amongst whites, filled with hatred toward one another. Or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that is spread across our land, with an effort to understand compassion and love. For those of you who are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people, I would only say that I can also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to get beyond or go beyond these rather difficult times. A favorite poem, my favorite poet was Aeschylus. He once wrote, "Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black.